The valley was supposed to be quiet. Intelligence had promised that the remote Afghan outpost was abandoned, just another husk in the endless sprawl of mountain ridges and dust. The Navy SEALs had trekked in under cover of night, gear strapped tight, rifles at the ready, expecting reconnaissance, not resistance. But the silence broke. It started as a whisper on the comms. Then came the staccato rhythm of gunfire, followed by the harsh crack of mortars. The SEALs were pinned down before they'd even realized they'd walked into a trap. Dust and rock exploded around them as they scrambled for cover among the ruined walls of the outpost. Lieutenant Mason, the team leader, pressed his back against the crumbling stone, his jaw clenched as he keyed the radio. "Command, this is Echo 2-1. We are compromised." "Repeat, compromised. Heavy contact. Request immediate support." "Over." "Static." He tried again, but the only answer was the whistle of billets carving into stone. The men exchanged grim looks. Cut off, surrounded, with the ridgelines crawling with enemy fighters. The lieutenant's hand shook just slightly as he reloaded, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing what being trapped out here meant. They were elite. They had trained for this. But even the best had limits, and the enemy knew their every move. Then, something strange. Between bursts of gunfire, they heard it, a single, sharp rifle crack, different from the AK fire echoing across the hills. The round was precise, surgical. An enemy fighter who had been closing and tumbled backward, dropped cleanly. The SEALs froze. They hadn't fired. Another shot followed, then another, each one deliberate. Enemy silhouettes fell where they stood, confusion rippling through the ambushes. Someone out there was covering them. Lieutenant Mason pressed low behind the wall, eyes scanning the distant tree line. He muttered under his breath, half in disbelief, "That's not one of ours." The men shared uneasy glances. Whoever it was, they weren't just good. They were exceptional. "Sniper," one of the SEALs whispered. But whose side? The team didn't have time to question. More rounds tore downrange, carving through the enemy ranks. The attackers faltered, momentarily thrown off balance. Mason seized the chance, barking orders to reposition. But his mind kept returning to that single thought. Who the hell was out there, watching over them in the chaos? The answer was closer than he realized, and she was about to change everything. The sniper had been in position long before the SEALs walked into the trap. Nestled high above the valley, hidden beneath a web of netting and branches, she'd been observing for days. Alone. Silent. Invisible. Her name was Sergeant Elena Torres, though few ever remembered it. To most, she was just a ghost. She had not been assigned to cover the SEALs. In fact, she wasn't supposed to be there at all. Her orders had been cut weeks ago, her mission buried in classified reports. Yet, when her scope tracked the sudden eruption of the ambush, her pulse quickened. The men below were fighting hard, but they were trapped, outnumbered, outgunned. She saw the desperation in the way they fired, covering each other in shifts, the rhythm of professionals forced into survival mode. Her finger curled around the trigger, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to break the silence. One squeeze. One target dropped. Her shots came slowly, measured between their bursts, each one a ghostly hand plucking life from the ridgeline. She knew better than to fire recklessly. Precision was what bought time. Through her scope, she saw their leader glance toward the hills, confusion flickering in his eyes. He didn't know her, and he wasn't meant to. But still, she kept pulling the trigger. Memories flashed in the stillness between shots. Of the last unit she had covered. The one that hadn't made it back. Of the commander who told her she wasn't needed. Right up until the day his men fell, one by one, because she hadn't been there. This time, she swore, it would be different. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she shifted, sighting another figure creeping toward the SEAL's flank. A slow exhale, then the shot broke, clean and final. Down in the valley, the SEALs moved again. Their leader's commands were sharper now, confidence restored by the unseen guardian. He didn't know who was keeping them alive, but he was smart enough to use the opening she was giving him. Then the radio on her shoulder crackled. A voice she hadn't heard in months. "Elena, is that you?" Her blood ran cold. The call sign was encrypted, unmistakably military, which meant one thing: someone up the chain had been tracking her, watching, waiting for the moment she revealed herself. For a heartbeat, she considered ignoring it, vanishing back into silence. But then another mortar whistled into the valley below, detonating too close to the pinned squad. She flinched, hands tightening on the rifle. No, she couldn't disobey. Not now. Slowly, she reached for the radio. Her voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of choices she thought she'd left behind. "Ghost here," she whispered, holding the high ground. "Tell your boys they're not alone." And down below, amid smoke and fire, a battered SEAL lieutenant heard the words, and felt, for the first time that night, that survival might still be possible. The firefight raged on. Dust hung in the air like smoke, drifting between the jagged ruins of the outpost. The SEALs had rallied, taking advantage of the sudden reprieve offered by the unseen sniper. Every man on that team knew death had brushed their shoulders tonight, yet somehow, they were still standing. Lieutenant Mason crouched low, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Whoever was up there wasn't just a lucky shot. No, these were the kind of kills you only saw from someone who had lived behind a scope for years. "Mason," one of his men shouted over the rattle of gunfire. "That's precision military work. I've seen Marine snipers who weren't that clean." Mason didn't answer right away. He ducked another spray of rounds before gritting his teeth and leaning into the comms. "Whoever you are," he growled into the open channel, "identify yourself." There was silence, then a soft voice, calm and steady. "Ghost. Holding Overwatch. Don't waste your ammo. Use the gaps." The men exchanged startled glances. Mason froze for half a second at the voice. A woman. Out here. Alone. But he didn't question it aloud. Whoever she was buying them time. He pressed his headset again. "Ghost, you've got 5 SEALs pinned in this rat's nest. You're saying you're covering us?" A pause. Then, with a hint of dry irony, "If I wasn't, you'd already be dead." The line went quiet again, replaced by the sharp crack of her rifle. Another insurgent collapsed on the ridgeline, his rifle tumbling down the rocks. Mason allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Whoever this ghost was, she was good. But even with her help, the fight was far from over. More enemy fighters pushed up from the south, firing wildly, trying to box the SEALs in. The lieutenant barked orders, his men shifting from cover to cover, retaining disciplined bursts. They were holding, but only just. Through her scope, Elena Torres saw it all. She tracked movements, picked her shots, and bought them seconds. But she also saw what they didn't, the reinforcements coming down the far ridge. Too many. Even with her rifle, even with their training, numbers had weight. Her gut tightened. If they stayed, the SEALs would be swallowed whole. She toggled her radio. "Lieutenant Mason, you need to move. North Ridge is clay. I'll keep the path open. But if you stay, you're done." Mason clenched his jaw. He didn't like taking orders from ghosts. But the truth was in her tone, flat, unshakable. The kind of certainty only experience could forge. He finally nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Copy that, Ghost. Men, we're moving." With her covering fire snapping like lightning above, the SEALs broke from the ruins, darting through dust and smoke. Each movement was timed to her shots, as if she was conducting them through a deadly symphony. And for the first time in hours, Mason felt the ground shift, not toward death, but toward survival. By the time the SEALs reached the North Ridge, their lungs burned and their gear felt twice as heavy. But they were alive, and they all knew it wasn't because of luck. At the top of the incline, Mason raised a hand, signaling the men to halt. They crouched low, catching their breath, eyes scanning the darkness for more threats. But for the moment, the guns had fallen silent. Then, from the tree line, a figure stepped out. Her ghillie suit was ragged, flecked with dirt and leaves, her rifle slung low across her chest. Her face was streaked with grime, but her eyes were sharp, unwavering. For a moment, none of the SEALs spoke. Mason straightened slowly, his weapon half lowered. "Your Ghost." She didn't answer with words. She just nodded once, her expression unreadable. Up close, she looked nothing like the sniper he had imagined. She wasn't towering. She wasn't armored like a machine. She was lean, almost wiry. Her movements economical, efficient. The kind of person who had lived too long in the margins of battle. One of the SEALs let out a low whistle. "Say, that's the one who just saved our hides." Elena didn't flinch at the attention. She just adjusted the strap on her rifle and scanned the horizon, as if they were still in the middle of the fight. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "You've got more company coming. South Ridge, 2 clicks out. They'll regroup and follow. You don't have much time." Mason studied her. Something about her composure unsettled him. This wasn't a civilian who had gotten lucky with a rifle. This was someone who had seen the same wars he had, maybe worse. "You're not on my roster," he said carefully, "and no one back at command mentioned you." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, though it never reached her eyes. They wouldn't. The silence between them was heavy. The other SEAL shifted uncomfortably, but Mason held her gaze. He wanted to press, to demand answers, but the memory of her voice over the radio echoed in his head. "If I wasn't, you'd already be dead." There would be time for questions later. For now, survival came first. "All right, Ghost," Mason said finally. "You walk with us. We'll get out of this valley together." Her expression didn't change, but she gave another small nod. And for the first time in years, Elena Torres stepped out of the shadows, not just as a phantom with a rifle, but as a soldier once more. What the SEALs didn't yet know was that Ghost carried more than just a rifle. She carried scars, secrets, and a mission buried so deep the Admiralty itself had tried to forget it. And now, those ghosts were walking with them. The ridgeline stretched ahead like a broken scar across the land. Jagged rocks cut into their boots, dust filled every breath, and the silence was a cruel illusion. Lieutenant Mason knew it. Quiet didn't mean safety out here. Quiet meant someone was waiting. Ghost moved like she had been born in this terrain. She kept low, her rifle steady, her eyes never resting for more than a second. The SEALs trailed behind her, their movements disciplined but slower, their bodies aching from the fight. They had questions, every man did, but none dared break the silence. Finally, Mason caught up to her. "You said they'd regroup. How long do we have?" Her reply was flat, certain. "Less than 30 minutes. They'll flank and push us uphill. We can't outgun them, not in the open. You need to move east, into the ravine." Mason frowned. "That ravine's a choke point. If they pin us there, it's over." Ghost stopped, turned, and leveled him with a stare. Her eyes were cold, but beneath them burned something, resolve, maybe pain. "If you stay on this ridge, you'll never see them coming. You'll be cut down before you can blink. The ravine buys you time. I'll cover the high ground." One of Mason's men, Petty Officer Graves, muttered under his breath. "She talks like she's running the op." But no one argued louder. Not after the night they'd had. Mason hesitated only a moment longer before giving a sharp nod. "All right. Ravine it is. Move out." They pressed forward, the terrain growing harsher. Rocks tumbled under their boots. Gear clinked in the darkness. Every man felt the weight of exhaustion, hours without sleep, the adrenaline crash creeping in. But Ghost never slowed. If anything, she seemed sharper now. Her senses stretched thin but unbroken. Half an hour later, just as she predicted, the faint sound of voices and boots echoed behind them. The enemy had regrouped, and they were closing fast. Mason motioned his men into cover. The ravine loomed ahead, dark, steep, with walls that rose like jagged teeth. Not ideal, but at least it wasn't open ground. Ghost climbed the rocks with practiced ease, positioning herself above the narrow path. She laid her rifle down, adjusted her scope, and checked her wind. Every movement was smooth, mechanical. This was her world. Below, the SEALs tightened formation, rifles aimed toward the sound of pursuit. Mason glanced up at her, then back at his men. "Stay sharp. Ghost is our shield. We're the sword." Then the first figures appeared, silhouettes against the starlight, rifles raised. Ghost exhaled slowly, Her fingers squeezed. Crack! The first fell. The valley erupted with fire. Bullets sparked off rock, shouts filled the air, and the seals answered back with disciplined bursts. Ghost shifted positions fluidly, never staying in one place longer than a shot or two. Her rifle sang its deadly song, dropping enemies before they could even line up a bead on the seals below. Still, the numbers pressed. Still, the tide pushed. Mason backed commands, his men rotating fire, conserving ammo. But even with Ghost precision, he knew they couldn't hold this forever. That's when Ghost made her move. She slid down the ridge, landing beside the seals with a grace that didn't match her ragged appearance. She pulled a sidearm from her hip, clipped her rifle tight, and glanced at Mason. "You've got 6 left in your mag," she said coolly. "Save them. I'll clear us a path." Before he could argue, she was already moving, low, fast, a shadow among shadows. Mason watched in disbelief as this lone sniper, this woman no one knew, darted between cover and unleashed a storm that broke the enemy's line. Her sidearm cracked, her rifle followed, and the seals pressed forward behind her like wolves chasing the break in the herd. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, Mason felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. The ravine swallowed them whole. High walls pressed in, the moonlight barely reaching the bottom. Every sound echoed, boots on stone, metal scraping, even breath seemed louder. It was claustrophobic, suffocating. But it was also cover. The seals moved in staggered pairs, rifles aimed upward. Mason kept his gaze shifting between the shadows above and the women leading them below. Ghost moved with unsettling familiarity through the terrain, as though she'd memorized every stone long before they arrived. "Tell me something," Mason finally muttered, close enough for only her to hear. "Who trained you? No one shoots like that unless they've been through the same hell we have." Ghost didn't turn, didn't slow. Her answer was clipped, almost reluctant. "Not the same hell. Weiss." The weight of those words hung in the air. Mason wanted to press her, but before he could, Graves hissed from the rear. "Contact. High ground." Gunfire erupted again, sparks raining down from the cliffs. The enemy had anticipated the ravine. They were firing from above, trying to trap them in the kill zone. The seals scrambled for cover, but there was nowhere to go. The walls were too steep. Mason cursed it under his breath. This was the trap he'd feared. Then Ghost acted. Without hesitation, she slung her rifle, pulled a rope from her pack, and began scaling the rock face. Bullets cracked around her, chipping stone, but she climbed with relentless determination. Mason shouted for her to fall back, but she ignored him. Halfway up, she braced against the cliff, unslung her rifle, and fired point-blank into the ridge above. 2 bodies tumbled down, weapons clattering against the rocks. She didn't stop. She climbed higher, faster, until she vanished over the edge. Seconds stretched like hours. The firefight continued below, the seals pinned. Mason's gut twisted. He hated relying on an unknown, hated trusting someone he didn't understand, but he couldn't deny the truth. She was their only chance. Then, like a thunderclap, her rifle roared from above. Enemy silhouettes dropped one by one. Her shots weren't hurried. They were precise, surgical. Every bullet counted. And then, silence. The seals looked up, their chests heaving, sweat streaking their faces. At the top of the ridge, Ghost stood silhouetted against the stars. Her rifle hung at her side, smoke curling from the barrel. She was breathing hard now, finally showing strain. But her eyes were locked forward, still searching for more threats. Mason exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. "Damn," he muttered. "She's not just a sniper. She's a ghost." When Ghost descended, her movements were slower, heavier. Mason caught the slight limp she tried to hide. Blood stained her sleeve, a graze, maybe worse. But she didn't mention it. She simply reloaded, checked her gear, and nodded for them to keep moving. That silence told Mason more than words ever could. This wasn't the first time she had walked alone in the shadows, and it wouldn't be the last. But every shadow carries a price, and soon he would learn hers. The night was bleeding into dawn, but the mountains showed no mercy. The ravine they had stumbled into was a natural kill box. High cliffs on both sides, jagged choke points, and only one path forward. The SEALs had seen traps before, but this one was perfect. Too perfect. Commander Hayes muttered under his breath as he scanned the heights through thermal goggles. This wasn't chance. They herded us here. Ghost was already kneeling, her rifle steady on the edge of a broken boulder. Her breathing was even, calm, like she had walked into this death trap 100 times before. She didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't even nod. She simply whispered, "They'll hit in 3 waves. First to test, second to push, third to finish. When the third comes, you either break through, or you die here." The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. She had spoken with absolute certainty. Hayes studied her. "You fought this battle before." Her jaw tightened, but she kept her eye to the scope. "I've buried more men in ravines like this than I care to count." The first wave came exactly as she predicted. Shadows moved on the ridgelines, then gunfire rained down like steel rain. The SEALs scattered, returning fire where they could, but Ghost was the anchor. Every shot she fired tore a hole in the assault. A rifle cracked from the far ridge, an enemy sniper, but Ghost didn't even adjust. She fired once, and silence followed. "Sniper down," she whispered. The SEALs moved with renewed confidence. They weren't just fighting anymore, they were surviving because of her. But the second wave came harder. Heavier weapons. Mortars. One shell slammed into the canyon floor, blasting rock and dust high into the air. Echoes of men shouting in foreign tongues rolled across the walls. "Fall back deeper," Hayes ordered, dragging his men behind broken stone. Ghost didn't move at first. She stayed at the edge, firing until her rifle clicked empty. Only then did she pull back, slinging a fresh mag with the smoothness of instinct. When she dropped beside Hayes, she said something that chilled him. "They know me." Hayes frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're not after you. They're after me. That's why they won't stop." The SEALs froze at her words. Before Hayes could press her, the third wave began. Hundreds of boots thundered on the cliffs above, pouring down both sides. It was the kind of force that swallowed men whole. Even with SEAL training, even with Ghost precision, they couldn't outlast sheer numbers. And yet, she stood. Ghost rose atop a boulder, silhouetted against the faint silver of pre-dawn. Her rifle barked, dropping men as fast as they came into view. Her figure seemed untouchable, a phantom of the mountains. Every SEAL below her felt something stir in their chests, not fear, not despair, but awe. The battle dragged on in brutal rhythm, burst fire, screams, grenades detonating in confined stone chambers. The ravine became a furnace of death. SEALs were bleeding, exhausted, but none dared collapse. Not while Ghost still fought. Finally, when the smoke thinned, the survivors of the third wave broke. They scattered into the rocks, leaving only silence and the stench of gunpowder. The SEALs slumped against stone, gasping for breath. Hayes looked at Ghost, her clothes torn, dust coating her skin, but her eyes still sharp. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat on the stone, cleaning her rifle like it was an old ritual. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Just someone who should have died here years ago." The sun finally touched the peaks, spilling pale light into the ravine. The SEALs were alive, but barely. Ammo was low, medkits almost gone, and every man bore wounds. Ghost stood apart from them, staring up at the cliffs. For the first time, she looked less like a phantom and more like a woman carrying the weight of ghosts that weren't Hayes alone. Hayes approached, his voice low. "You saved us. But I need the truth now. Who are you?" Ghost exhaled slowly. She set her rifle down, her hands trembling slightly as if putting the weapon aside stripped her armor away. "I wasn't always Ghost," she began. "Once, I was Sergeant Elena Marquez. Special reconnaissance, long-range sniper. I was embedded with a NATO unit in these mountains 5 years ago." The SEALs leaned in, listening. "We were cut off. Ambushed. Just like you. They wiped out my entire unit in this very ravine. I survived by luck, and by killing everyone who came for me. 3 days. No food, no water. Just rage and a rifle. When it ended, there was no unit left. Just me. Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. I should have gone home. But instead, I stayed. Some call me a mercenary. Others call me a deserter. Truth is, I couldn't leave. I haunted these mountains, fighting whoever came. That's why they call me Ghost. Because I don't belong to the living anymore. The seals were silent. Even hardened warriors could feel the sorrow in her confession. Hayes finally spoke. You're wrong. Her eyes flicked to him, cold and weary. About what? You do belong to the living. You saved us. That wasn't a ghost's work, that was a soldier's work. And soldiers don't abandon each other. The word struck her deeper than any bullet could. For the first time in years, Elena, Ghost, looked uncertain. But before she could answer, their radios crackled. A rescue chopper was inbound. The seals erupted in weary relief. As the thump of rotors echoed closer, Ghost picked up her rifle and slung it across her back. Hayes turned. Come with us. You've earned your way home. She shook her head. My war ends where it began. She looked up at the cliffs, at the stones stained with battles past. This place doesn't let go of its dead. The chopper descended, kicking up dust. The seals boarded, one by one. Hayes lingered, staring at her. Ghost, he said over the roar. If you ever decide you're living again, find me. For a long moment, she stood there, wind tearing at her hood. Then she gave a single nod. As the helicopter lifted, the seals watched her grow small among the mountains. A lone figure, standing tall against the endless stone. And though they would never see her again, they carried her with them, the ghost who had answered their call when no one else could.